Belarus is broke and Lukashenko has a new plan: make his diplomats bring in the cash. Can this Brya's economic strategy save the regime? Meanwhile, Ukraine's long-range drone campaign shakes Russia to the core. Multiple oil refineries were hit in just 2 nights. And while Putin talks peace from a monastery, the UK says, don't believe a word. Is Russia really ready to negotiate or just buying time? Plus, the US sends a top envoy to Moscow amid nuclear submarine threats. What's behind this sudden move? This is Ukraine Today. I'm Zaroslava Kolesnikova and I'm here to break it all down for you. Let's go. While Belarus sinks into economic stagnation, dictator Alexander Lukashenko has found a new way to fill the budget gaps by turning diplomats into cash generators. According to Ukrainian intelligence, he ordered ambassadors to bring in money and deliver measurable economic benefit. Is this a desperate move or a beginning of a new authoritarian export model? Find out more in our report.
Belarusian dictator Lukashenko is preparing a personnel purge in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus. According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, some diplomats will be replaced with more loyal and controllable individuals. Their main task is to find ways to support the country's economy under conditions of international isolation. The decision was made after the first meeting since 2021 of the heads of Belarusian diplomatic missions in Minsk.
Despite economic difficulties, Lukashenko continues to use diplomacy as a tool for foreign policy maneuvering. Minsk is trying to convince the West that the sanctions policy has failed, while simultaneously hinting at the possibility of releasing political prisoners in exchange for concessions. From a publication by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine on the agency's website.
At a meeting of the heads of diplomatic missions, as reported by Ukrainian intelligence, the Belarusian dictator stated, and I quote, "The economy is limping. There are problems with exports." That is precisely why Lukashenko is forcing the Foreign Policy Service to start delivering economic returns.
He is trying to weaken that external pressure, to play on the contradictions between the US and the European Union to somehow achieve the lifting of sanctions, at least those imposed by the United States of America. All of these are tactical moves, and Lukashenko is a master at this. Sometimes he manages to achieve the desired result very effectively.
The recent economic statistics of Belarus do not inspire optimism. Ukrainian intelligence reports, from January to May 2025, the export of goods and services grew by less than 0.5% compared to last year, while imports increased by more than 3%. The trade balance has once again turned negative. The deficit exceeded $770 million. That's almost 4 times more than a year ago. The main problem lies with goods. Their export has decreased, while imports, on the contrary, have increased. Even in its main market, Russia, Belarusian industry is losing ground. In 5 months, deliveries of engineering products, including tractors, combines, and passenger cars, fell by $320 million. And although Moscow remains a strategic partner, support from the Kremlin does not solve the fundamental problems. Belarusian goods are gradually being pushed out of traditional markets in Europe, Asia, and Africa. The reason is secondary sanctions, which have affected fertilizers, metals, and steel. Analysts emphasize Lukashenko is doing everything he can to climb out of the economic hole. But he is not doing it for the citizens of Belarus.
Yes, he begs for money from Russia. Yes, he looks for loopholes to bypass sanctions, tries to trade in sanctioned goods. This is possible because the sanctions against Belarus are not equivalent to those imposed on Russia. He uses all these methods primarily for his own survival. He doesn't care at all about the country or the social system.
After Alexander Lukashenko openly took Moscow's side in the war against Ukraine, the Belarusian economy has become increasingly dependent on the situation in Russia. And over there is stagnation, which also affects Minsk's capabilities. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the worsening balance of payments is already creating a risk of a rapid devaluation of the Belarusian ruble. And this is a blow to citizens' wallets and to internal stability. Western sanctions have limited room for maneuver. Entering new markets and attracting alternative financing is becoming increasingly difficult. As a result, Belarus is now even more tied to the Russian economy, logistics, and money.
Minimal growth rates will persist until the end of 2025, following integration after 2024. In 2026-2027, the crisis will worsen due to a decline in household incomes and the further entanglement of the Belarusian economy in Russia's stagflationary orbit, from a publication by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine on the agency's website.
After breaking ties with the West, Minsk was left with only one financial donor, Moscow. On July 25th, at an international environmental conference in Gorno-Altaysk, Belarusian Finance Minister Yuri Seliverstov admitted that the country urgently needs Russian loans, primarily to save the oil refining sector and to implement major infrastructure projects. According to the World Bank, Belarus is the largest borrower from Russia. As of the end of 2023 alone, the volume of intergovernmental loans exceeded $8 billion. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
Ukraine's security service keeps hitting back and hard. Explosions rocked Lipetsk, Ryazan, Penza and Samara overnight on August 2nd. Then came August 3rd, drone strikes in gate of oil refines in Kosovo, Sochi and Adler. Is Russia losing control over its own skies? See all the details in our report.
On the night of August 3rd, a 2,000 cubic meter tank containing petroleum products caught fire in Sochi. The fire soon spread to another tank. The blaze at the oil depot could not be extinguished for several hours. Local residents counted more than 30 explosions during the night.
It's flying. Do you hear that? Boom there.
There you go, fireburst.
Fire, fire, everyone.
Another one right there, got it?
The mayor of Sochi confirmed the information about the fire at the oil depot. According to him, drone debris hit a tank with petroleum products. Because of the UAV attack, 52 flights were delayed at Sochi airport. Russian authorities also reported a fire at one of the largest oil refineries in Russia, located in Kstovo, Nizhny Novgorod region. In Adler, a fire broke out after a drone attack near the local oil refinery.
It's heading for the oil depot.
Again, it's heading right there, to the oil depot. Quiet! Be quiet! We can hear it. It sounds like a motorcycle. Wow, it hit!
A day earlier, drones from the Security Service of Ukraine struck military targets on Russian territory, according to the SBU. The first target of the long-range UAVs was the Primorsko-Akhtarsk military airfield in the Krasnodar region. Their storage and launch sites for Shaheds were hit. These are used to attack Ukraine every night. After the drone strike, a fire broke out near the airfield, according to the SBU.
The second target was the Elektropibor plant in the city of Penza, which works for the Russian military-industrial complex. Here, equipment for digital networks in military control systems is produced, as well as devices for aviation, armored vehicles, ships, and spacecraft. SBU drones successfully struck the facility, and smoke was observed in the area of the explosions. From a statement by the Security Service of Ukraine on Telegram.
On the night of August 2nd, explosions were heard in Lipetsk, Ryazan, Penza, and the Samara region. During the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed hits on the Ryazan and Novokuybishevsk oil refineries, as well as a fuel and lubricants depot in the Voronezh region.
I want to express my sincere thanks to you for our special...
I want to thank you for our special long-range operations on the territory of Ukraine. They are very noticeable, and each one is felt by the enemy, and our operations will continue. Russia is dragging out the war, which means it will continue to receive just responses.
Experts believe that the war is destroying the Russian economy and depriving it of a future. And precise long-range strikes on military targets and oil refineries reduce Russia's ability to finance military operations.
The damage is quite costly because in the footage we can see, and there's plenty of it online, Russian residents themselves post these videos on Telegram. The strikes are not just hitting the plant grounds, they're targeting the most expensive parts. These are the refining columns. Since drone strikes have become more and more precise, these targets are clearly chosen deliberately as the most expensive and hardest to replace parts of the plant.
In order for Ukraine to strike military infrastructure deep inside Russia even more effectively, Germany has begun funding the production in Ukraine of long-range weapons systems necessary for the country's defense, according to Die Welt. In July, the first contract was signed to finance the production of more than 500 long-range Antonov 196 drones. These kamikaze drones have a combat range of 200 kilometers and are equipped with a 50-kilogram warhead. And Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal stated that Ukraine is very close to obtaining its own ballistic missiles.
The President of Ukraine has already announced that Ukraine will have its own ballistic missiles. We are very close to this. That is basically all I can say publicly on this matter. Denis Shmyhal, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, in an interview with the BBC.
Back in May 2025, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine must develop its own ballistic capabilities as quickly as possible, as this is a key element of the country's defense capability. Natalia Husova, Dmytro Shanghelov for Freedom TV channel.
America sends a high-level envoy to Russia, but all eyes are on the nuclear submarine the US just exposed. Was this a response to Medvedev's wild threats? And can Ukraine benefit from the rising heat between their superpowers? Watch the full report.
From the corridors of power, the absolute impression is that the deadline announced by Trump's team, the 8th, will neither be missed nor postponed. They intend to stick to it and are doing everything possible to get results by that date. But what kind of results exactly? That's the interesting part. I spoke with American diplomats and they say they're deliberately not clarifying this wording, meaning they're leaving room for decisions. But the result could be either a high-level meeting. You've probably seen in the news that President Zelensky said he's ready for it, stating that there have been enough talks at the expert level and it's time to move on to discussions at the level of top officials. Or, for example, the result could be the agreement on a roadmap, which could also lead to such a meeting. But, well, we see that everything is dragging on for far too long. Trump needs a breakthrough. And that's precisely why, for example, this ultimatum was shortened. And in fact, that's the reason behind all these recent actions, both tough and constructive statements, Washington's actions, threats of sanctions, and attempts at dialogue. Indeed, the US ambassador to NATO announced that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, would be in Moscow. And what's interesting is that he said the United States wants to get agreement on the deal from both sides, that is, from Kyiv and from Moscow. And he also said that the president, and I quote, is becoming more and more disappointed by the lack of progress in the peace process. And basically, it is this very disappointment of Trump's that explains why, for example, the White House changed its mind and decided to sell weapons to Europeans, but specifically for Ukraine. Because as it turns out, Trump personally believes that these deliveries will create conditions for a settlement. What does that mean in this context? In fact, there are several directions here. At least that's how they see it in Washington. The first is to support the front, because the balance of forces along the dividing line, along the front line, is supposed to make Russia understand that it is unable to advance, to achieve significant results by military means, and that it must stop and start negotiations. That is why the United States will do everything to prevent, for these very reasons, a shortage of weapons. Interestingly, there is also a second, quite controversial message from the top American diplomat. He says that these sales are not even so much about making money for the United States. Rather, it's to ease the burden on the budget and avoid dissatisfaction among taxpayers. Well, we understand who he's talking about. He specifically means Trump voters. And here's a direct quote. By selling American weapons to our allies, we want to put pressure on Russia to bring it back to the negotiating table and, attention here, to ensure an early ceasefire. And it's precisely this wording that I ask you to pay attention to, because essentially the top American diplomat has voiced the ultimate goal of Trump's team. What they want to achieve by this deadline, what the United States is striving for, and what would make them consider that Trump's ultimatum has indeed been fulfilled. In other words, it's an agreement on a long-term ceasefire. Well, on the one hand, you have to admit that's quite a lot as well. On the other hand, I've spoken with many top American experts, and they are precisely the ones who talk about the danger of this very approach, when Moscow could actually cease fire under Trump's pressure, allowing Trump to claim that he has achieved the goal he promised and worked toward. But then what would stop the Kremlin from resuming hostilities at some point and starting them all over again? Trump's order to move 2 nuclear submarines in response to Medvedev's threats is exactly what they're talking about. And in the morning, off camera, I asked several retired top US military officials for their opinion on this, because it was important to hear not what's said on TV, but the perspective of real experts. They agree that, first of all, Trump's decision is demonstrative in nature. They explained that American Ohio-class submarines are already constantly patrolling the world's oceans. This is standard practice. It has been working for decades. The only thing that changes is, well, they were already at sea. The point is about publicly announcing what was previously considered a secret, because in response to escalating situations, American submarines had already been redeployed before. However, the only difference now is that Trump is saying this publicly. Previously, their routes were never disclosed, not even in such approximate terms. And this is a clear hint to Moscow, which fits into the overall strategy of pressure, as I hear from the military. The only difference is that this so-called nuclear poker is now happening openly. It's happening on social media. But American military officials say that so far nothing has changed regarding the level of combat readiness or the actions of American strategic forces. And this is more a part of the dialogue, a part of the pressure on Moscow, and a part of the larger geopolitical game that Donald Trump is currently playing. Colleagues.
Thank you, Dmytro. That was Dmytro Onopchenko, our special correspondent in the United States.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia keeps shelling Ukrainian cities and Putin claims he's ready for long-term peace. But is the Kremlin actually ready to negotiate? UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy dubs it. What did Putin say during his visit to Belarus? And why does the West call it a bluff? Find out in our report.
Putin is feigning interest in peace. This is the conclusion reached by analysts at the American Institute for the Study of War after his statements with authoritarian colleague Lukashenko in Belarus. In front of journalists, the Russian dictator claimed that Moscow is interested in a stable and lasting peace with Ukraine, but immediately shifted the responsibility for prolonging the war onto Kyiv, saying that if the Ukrainian side believes now is not the time for negotiations, Russia can wait. In response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reminded that Ukraine has long proposed moving from words to action and that it is only the Russian Federation that is dragging out the process.
We hear statements coming from Russia. If this is a signal of their genuine willingness to end the war with dignity and establish a truly lasting peace, and not just an attempt to buy more time for war and delay sanctions, then Ukraine once again confirms its readiness to meet at the leaders' level at any time. We understand who makes the decisions in Russia and who must bring this war to an end. The whole world understands this as well. Ukraine proposes moving from exchanging statements and technical-level meetings to a conversation between leaders. America has proposed this, and Ukraine has supported it. What is needed is Russia's willingness. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Kyiv continues to seek any real avenues to end Russian aggression. That is why, even to Putin's pseudo-statements about wanting peace, the Ukrainian side is forced to respond. However, the Kremlin dictator himself does not actually demonstrate any willingness for dialogue. At the same press conference with Lukashenko, he once again called the Ukrainian government unconstitutional. At the same time, it is Putin himself who has repeatedly rewritten the Russian constitution to suit his own interests in order to stay in power. As for the so-called conditions for ending the war, the dictator merely repeated the 2024 ultimatum: the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from 4 regions that Moscow doesn't even control, and a refusal to join NATO. Experts insist the Kremlin does not want to and cannot end the war on its own.
If a country is militarized, if it is built like a military camp, if it is geared for war, if it revels in mass genocidal killings and practices, if it cannot compete in any other way except by invading developed territories and destroying them, then of course it will do all of this. That is beyond doubt. For Russia, let me emphasize again, for Russia, for Putin's Russia, where all competitive opportunities have been hollowed out, both in the domestic market and in foreign markets, except for one, war, and it is impossible to exit from war.
Putin has no intention of stopping the killing of people in Ukraine for the sake of his ambitions. At a meeting with journalists in Belarus, he refused to consider the loss of 1 million soldiers from his army as being in vain. According to the Russian dictator, the eliminated occupiers created the conditions for the Russian army, and I quote, to move forward. In other words, for the Kremlin's master, Russians are simply a resource.
The Russian dictator needed to respond in order to calm the domestic audience. You have to agree, when the American president states that the losses of Ukraine's defense forces are around 80,000 personnel, while the losses of the Russian occupation forces, according to American sources, exceed 100,000, this creates a serious dissonance within Russian society itself.
Putin also continues to spread the illusion among the masses that Russians are advancing along the entire front line. He also repeated the fake news about the alleged capture of the city of Chasiv Yar in the Donetsk region by the occupiers. This has not been confirmed by either the Ukrainian side or independent OSINT analysts. The footage shows yet another failed assault. According to the soldiers of the 11th Army Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the demonstrative raising of tricolors cost the Federation dearly.
There were Russian disinformation attempts, you saw them, about Chasiv Yar. This is Russian disinformation. Ukrainian units are defending our positions and stopping every Russian attempt to advance in the Donetsk, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. In the end, we push them back. And it's not easy, but this is the defense of Ukrainians' very right to life. Every such direction is very important.
In addition, the Russian dictator stated that the Russian Federation is not seizing Ukrainian territories, but supposedly returning its own. This is yet another warning sign for the West, which it seems the American administration has heard. On Newsmax, the head of the White House emphasized the Russian dictator seeks to capture all of Ukraine, but it will be difficult. Let me remind you that on August 8th, the United States will impose 100% tariffs on Russia and its key trading partners if Putin does not stop his aggressive war. At the same time, Washington is negotiating with the European Union to sell American weapons to the EU, which will then transfer them to Kyiv to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities in response to Russian aggression. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you believe in truth, like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Want to support our work? Become a sponsor. Every bit helps us keep the information front strong. Stay strong, stay informed, and stay with Ukraine.